welcome to all who are joining us here this evening from around the globe. Tonight's class is graciously dedicated by our dear friends David and Ida Schattenstein in the sacred memory of Rabbi Gavriel Noyach and his wife Rivki Holzberg and all of the Kedoshim of Mumbai. Their first yahrzeit since the massacre, the terror massacre last year in Mumbai, is tonight, the first day of Kislev. The Schattenstein also dedicate this class in the loving memory of a young soul, Alta Shula Swerdlov, the daughter of Rabbi Yossi and Hindel Swerdlov from the holy city of Jerusalem, whose Shloshim, the 30th day since her passing a month ago in Jerusalem, is also this week. Tehei nishmasam tzurura b'tzurer hachayim, and may their memories serve as a source of inspiration and invigoration to all of us. This evening we want to explore a strange episode in the weekly portion of Toldos and discover how this subtle nuance, which at the surface seems so enigmatic and difficult to comprehend, really captures a fundamental teaching in life and in Judaism and Jewish history. The portion of Toldos focuses very much on Yitzchak Avinu's, Isaac's wellsprings. There is a hunger in the land of Israel, in the land of Canaan. Yitzchak, Isaac, travels to the Gerar, to the territory of the Philistines. It's in the territory of Gaza. There, the Torah tells us that all of the wells that Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak's father Abraham, dug and his servants dug, after his death, the Philistines stopped them. They were all plugged and refilled with earth. So Yitzchak redug and reopened all of the wells that were once dug out by his father, but plugged after his father's passing. And the Torah says Yitzchak gave them the same names as his father gave these wells. And then the Torah continues, Yitzchak's servants dig out their own original 3 wells. The first 2 wells they quarrel over with the Philistines who it belongs to. The third well, there's finally peace. We know the names of these 3 wells. The first Esek, the second Sitna, and the third Rechoivos. Finally, Yitzchak leaves the territory of the Philistines and he moves to the city of Be'er Sheva in the Negev, in the south of Eretz Yisrael, of the Holy Land. And there we are told his servants dig another well, searching for water. And at that point we are told the king of the Philistines, the king of the Plishtim, Avimelech, travels from his capital Gerar in the Philistine territory in Gaza to Yitzchak, to Isaac in Beersheba, seeking a peace treaty. Yitzchak says, why have you come here? You despised me, you loathed me, you didn't like me. And they said, we've seen that God, Avimelech and his delegation responds, we've seen that God is with you. We want to make a covenant of mutual harmony and peace with you. Yitzchak agrees, and he even throws a party, a feast for them. And now I'm going to ask you to open up source number 1 in your curriculum and source sheet right below the video. There is a PDF with a curriculum. Please open it up and follow source number 1 in Toldos, where the Torah says in chapter 26, verses 30-33, Chavav Lamed Lamed Gimel, Vayasla Mishte Vayoichlu Vayishtu. Isaac throws a feast for them, for Avimelech, the king of Philistine and his delegation. They eat and they drink. Vayashkimu v'aboiker, they wake up in the morning. Vayishavu ish le'achiv. They each swear to the other. Yitzchak swears to Avimelech. Avimelech takes an oath to Isaac. Vayishalchem Yitzchak vayelchu me'itay b'shalom. Yitzchak sends them off and they leave in peace. They have accepted an oath to each other that they would behave towards each other with peace, with harmony, without discord and conflict, respect each other's boundaries and not infringe on anybody's territory or possessions. And then the Torah continues, Vayihi bayoimahu, it was that very day when the Philistine king left the Jewish patriarch Yitzchak, he left him. Vayavoyu avdei Yitzchak vayagidu loi al oidos habe'er asher chaforu vayoimru loi matzonu mayim. The servants of Yitzchak come back to their master, to Yitzchak, and they talk to him about the well which they began digging, as you recall, right when he came to Beersheba. We learned about a well that they dug, and they tell Yitzchak, they inform him, we have found water. The digging was not futile, it was not in vain. We discovered a wellspring of water. Vayikra Oisa Shiva. And Yitzchak Avinu calls this well Shiva. We will see what that means in a moment. Al Kain, thus, the Torah concludes the episode. Shem Ma'ir Be'er Sheva Ad Hayom Hazeh. The name of the city is Be'er Sheva till this very day. Till this very day means whenever you're reading it. Till this very day it's called Be'er Sheva. Now, as you know, the archaeologists in Israel have excavated this region quite extensively in modern years, in recent years, and in fact, the ancient region of Be'er Sheva is very close to the modern city Be'er Sheva in Israel today. They call it Tel Sheva, where they excavated an elaborate many structures, ancient structures from very old times, homes and walls and wells, and so on and so forth, around the territory of today's Be'er Sheva. So the Torah says that this is the name of the city Be'er Sheva to this very day. Now, why did Yitzchak call this final wellspring Shiva? What does Shiva mean? There are two different perspectives among the biblical commentators. Rashi, the Radak, other commentators believe that Shiva is from the etymology Shvua, which means an oath. Meaning, this well was called Shiva because Yitzchak Avinu took an oath to the Philistine king, and the Philistine king accepted upon himself an oath to Yitzchak that he would respect Yitzchak's possession and territory. So this well is named based on the oath and the covenant. And thus the name of the city, Be'er Sheva. Be'er Sheva would mean the well of the oath. That is the perspective of Rashi and others. However, the Siparno, one of the great biblical commentators, Rabbi Avadia Siparno, whom I'm going to discuss in a moment, he has a very different interpretation. And I'm going to ask you to open up source number 3 for a moment. We'll soon get back to source number 2. The Siparno says, look inside, Vayikra Oisa Shiva. Kares HaBe'er Shiva, Mipnei Shahaya Makim Shvi Shabai Chafru Be'er. Shiva means 7. It doesn't mean an oath. Shvua means an oath. Shiva means number 7 in Hebrew. Why? Because this was the 7th well which Yitzchak dug out. How do we know it's the 7th well? So the Siparno explains. Gimel shel Avram shesasmu plishtim ka'amroi v'chol ha'be'eris sitmum plishtim v'leya amr kol b'pachas megimel. There were 3 wells which Abraham dug out in the Philistine territory, and after his passing, they plugged them, and Yitzchak reopened all of those wells which the Philistines filled with earth. How do we know it was 3? Because it says all of the wells which Avraham dug after he passed away, the Philistines filled them with earth. What does it mean, all of the wells? It's obviously not one well, then it would say Be'er. It's obviously not 2 wells, because then it would say ha-be'eros, the wells, plural. When it says v'chol ha-be'eros, and all of the wells, the Siparno says it's minimum 3. Can't be less than 3. And if the Torah wants us to know the number, it would not just be nebulous completely. So we assume that there are 3 wells which Avraham Avinu dug out, They were plugged and stopped after his death, filled with earth, and Yitzchak Avinu reopens them. So these are three. Then the Separno continues, V'gimel shel Yitzchak, shein Asik sitner rechayvus. Yitzchak himself, the Torah says, dug 3 wells, Asik sitner rechayvus. So we have 6. V'zahaya Shvi, now this was the 7th, clearly. Because when they come to Beersheba, his servants begin digging a well. After the peace treaty and the feast with Avimelech, that day they come to him and they say, we found water in this well. And he calls it Shiva, 7. This was the 7th well, which they called Shiva. In these archaeological excavations done in Israel, very close to the contemporary city of Beersheba, as I said, called Tel Sheva, we see many different ancient structures, including, according to archaeologists, from the date of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Of course, it's very difficult to know what is what exactly, but there are certainly signs of the ancient civilization there, including signs of wells that were excavated, that were dug out by the people who lived then. Which territory exactly houses the wells of Avram and Yitzchak, that we can't know, we don't know. But there has been, as I said, extensive archaeology in that region. Now, in summation, we have 2 interpretations for Shiva. Rashi means it's an oath. According to Separno, it's number 7, which actually suits the the clear pronunciation of the word Shiva, 7. But the Torah doesn't only say that Yitzchak named it Shiva. The Torah continues, as you recall, the last line of source number 1. How does the Torah conclude the whole episode? Al Kain, Shemair Be'er-Sheva Adayim Hazeh. This is the reason that the name of the city is Be'er-Sheva to this very day. Why? Because Yitzchak called this well Shiva. Here, we are confronted with quite a difficult question. How can the Torah say, this is the reason that this place, location is called Be'er-Sheva, because Yitzchak called it Shiva, when the Torah itself, 2 portions ago in Vayera, told us that Avraham Avinu called this city Be'er-Sheva. Why? Because of a covenant and an oath he made and he took with whom? With the king of Philistine. His name, Avimelech. Because of what? Because of a well. And that's why Avram called it Be'er-Sheva. And this is clear in the Torah 2 portions ago. Open up your curriculum to the beginning of source number 2, and you'll see it. Parshas Vayera, Perek Chaf Aleph, Psukim Chaf Ches Lamed Beis. What does the Torah say? What happens, the context there is that Avraham Avinu chastised Avimelech because he had a well, and Avimelech's servant stole the well from him, and he comes to the king, and he says, what is going on? Why did your servant seize my well? And Avimelech says, I never heard of it, I never knew it, nobody told me, you never told me, one of those. So Avraham makes a covenant with Avimelech. He puts 7 sheep aside. Source number 2, Vayatziv Avraham Sheva Kivsis Hatzayin Levad, and he places 7 sheep aside. Vayomer Avimelech el Avraham, Maheinu Sheva Kvosis Ha'ela Asher Tzavta Levadona. Avimelech asks Abraham, what are these 7 sheep which you have placed aside? Vayomer Ki es Sheva Kvosis Tikach Miyadi. Avraham tells Avimelech, I want you to take these 7 sheep from me. They will serve as a testimony, as witnesses, that I have dug this well, it's mine. Al Kain, therefore, Kara la makim hahu Be'er-Sheva. Therefore, Avraham Avinu called that place Be'er-Sheva, Kisham nishba'u shneim, because over there, in that place, both of them, Avraham Avinu and Avimelech, took an oath. Over what? Over the well. Vayichrusu bibris be'Be'er-Sheva. They made a covenant in Be'er-Sheva, and Avimelech and his commander-in-chief Fichol leave, and they go back to the land of the Philistines. Clearly, Avraham Avinu dug a well. It was disputed. He makes a covenant with Avimelech. They both take an oath to respect each other's boundaries and territories and possessions. Therefore, Avraham Avinu calls it Be'er Shava, and the Torah says, Kisham Nishbu Shneim. There they both took an oath. Avraham took an oath, Avimelech took an oath. What does Be'er Shava mean? The well of an oath. This was the place of his well. This was the place of Be'er Shava, where they took an oath concerning his well, that it's his Be'er. In fact, if you go to Israel today, in this territory, you'll see there's a place they take you, and they call it the Well of Avram, Be'er Avram. There's this old tradition that this is the place where Avram Avinu had his well. It says, Vayita Eshel Be'er Sheva, there's a palm tree there, and there's a well there, and there is some type of legend or tradition that this was Avram Avinu's well, and many tourists come there and they check it out. It's an ancient well with a whole interesting, complex system of how to draw out the water from the well. Now, if this is really the well of Avram Avinu or not, I don't know. As usual, many debate it and question it and say that it's just a legend and has nothing to do with Avraham Avinu's well. It's an old well that they have there in Beersheba, in the old Beersheba. Maybe it is his well. But the bottom line is that this is a contemporary remnant of that region, of that territory where all of this action took place. Now, here's the question. If Avraham Avinu named it Be'er Shava, as the Torah just said in Parshas Vayera, how does the Torah come and tell us and told us that when Yitzchak named the well Shiva, therefore the name of the city is Be'er Shava? What do you mean, therefore the name of the city is Be'er Shava? Avraham Avinu named it Be'er Shava. Many, many years before this story of Yitzchak Avinu's peace treaty with Avimelech. What is happening? And generally, the question is, why would Yitzchak give the city a name as though it was a new name when his father gave it the name? Why do you have to give it the same name a second time? It's a difficult question because the Torah makes believe as though it doesn't know about the first story. Yitzchak Avinu clearly called it Be'er Shava. Avram Avinu clearly called it Be'er Shava. And now, a generation later, Yitzchak Avinu names his well Shiva. The well that they found in Be'er Sheva, he names Shiva. And therefore the Torah says, therefore, it has the name Be'er Sheva till this very day. The commentators here again have two very different approaches. The Rashbam and other commentators believe that there are two Be'er Shevas. In other words, this question perturbed them so much that they were ready to believe that it's impossible that it's the same territory. There must be two Be'er Shevas. Avraham Avinu named one territory Be'er Sheva, and Yitzchak Avinu named a second territory Be'er Sheva. And then you have no problem. The story happened in one place with Avram, and he gave it that name. And then Yitzchak followed the cue of his father. It happened in another place, and he called it Be'er Sheva. That's one approach. But now let us see the Separno's approach. The Separno, his first name was Rabbi Evadia. He was born approximately in the year 1476. Passed away approximately in the year 1550. He was an Italian Jew. He was born in Italy. He lived for a while in Rome. He was a brilliant man. He excelled in philosophy, in mathematics, in linguistics, especially in medicine, and was also a great Jewish scholar. And his commentary on the Chumash, known as the Separno, written by Rabbi Evadia of Separno, is very well-known and very interesting commentary. The Separno gives us his explanation, and it's an original explanation. And now go back to source number 3, the last paragraph in source number 3. We're quoting the Separno. Al Kain Shema Ir Be'er Sheva. Besegel. Moira al Hashvua Val Misper Hashvua. Val Misper Hashiva. Avo B'mei Avram. Hoya Shema Ir Be'er Shava Bekometz. Al Shem Hashvua Belvat. The Separno makes an ingenious distinction. He says, look closely. In source number 1, if you go to source number 1, it says, Al Kain Shema Ir Be'er Sheva. Sheva with a segel under the shin. Sheva. If you go to source number 2, and you see the name Avram Avinu gave it, Al Kain Kara Lamakamahu Be'er Shava with a kametz. They're spelled the same, Shin Vei Zayin, but they're pronounced differently. It's a different vowel. This is Shava and this is Sheva. What's the difference? The Separno says the difference is very simple. Avram Avinu gave the name because of the oath. Be'er Shava. Shava means swore, took an oath. Kisham nishbu shneim, because there an oath was taken by the Philistine king Avimelech and by the founder of Judaism, Abraham Avram Avinu. They took an oath, Be'er Shava, over a well, which is Be'er, the well of the oath, Be'er Shava. Yitzchak Avinu also gave it the name Be'er Sheva, with a segel. Sheva with a segel doesn't mean an oath, it means 7. The 7th well, Be'er Sheva is the 7th well, not the well of the oath, the 7th well. Why? Because this was the 7th well that Yitzchak Avinu dug out. So therefore it's not a contradiction. He called it Be'er Shava. He called it Be'er Sheva. That's what the Separno says. So Separno adds that the Be'er Sheva of Yitzchak includes 2 connotations. Number 1, the number 7, and also the oath that he took with Avimelech. But Avram Avinu's Be'er Shava only includes one element. It was not the 7th well of Avram Avinu. It only includes the idea of an oath, that he and Avimelech took an oath to each other. Parenthetically, the Tzemach Tzedek, the 3rd Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, in his monumental work, Oir HaTorah, in Parshas Vayetze, quotes the Separno, supports him, and brings various proofs to authenticate the interpretation of the Separno. And one is an interesting one. He says in the beginning of Vayetze, we say, Vayetze Yitzchak mi Be'er Shava. Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Shava. Yaakov left the city of Be'er Shava, not the city of Be'er Sheva. And in the Midrash Rabbah, there's an interpretation there, Yatsa mi Be'er Shal Shvua. He went out from the well of oath, from the oath that Avimelech took with Avram Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu, and he decided he doesn't want to live in the same territory where he's going to have to take another oath with Avimelech, so he left Be'er Shal Shvua. And what does the Torah use the word? Be'er Shava, not Be'er Sheva. This is the Separno's perspective, but it only leaves us with a bigger question. Fine, great. Rabbi Vadia Separno found a distinction between Shava and Sheva. It's not the same name. But here's the big question. Why? Why did Avram Avinu call Be'er Shava only for the oath? And Yitzchak Avinu decided, no, I got to add the segel. I have to add the number of the well. Is it really so important? Why couldn't the Torah just say, this was already the city of Be'er Shava, Avram Avinu, and Yitzchak Avinu had the same name. He kept the name, Be'er Shava. No. Yitzchak Avinu's name is Be'er Sheva. He has to add the number of the well. Why? Why even add anything? Why not just keep the name? Why not just maintain it? Why change it? And if you're changing it, why such a subtle change? And what's the significance and the symbolism of it and the meaning of it? There's another question. By Avram Avinu it says, he called the name Be'er Shava. At the end of source number 2. Avram Avinu called the name. Al Kain Kara Lamakam Ahu Be'er Shava. Avram gave the name Be'er Shava. In Yitzchak's story in Toldos at the end of source number 1, it doesn't say he gave the name. He gave the name Shiva to the well. Al Kain Shema Ir Be'er Sheva Adayim Hazeh. The Torah says Therefore, the name of the city is Be'er Sheva till this very day. Doesn't attribute it directly to Yitzchak. It's a passive result. Since Yitzchak named the well Shiva, therefore, the name of the city is Be'er Sheva till this very day. By Avram Avinu, he is actively seen as the one who gave the name. And then there's another question. By Avram Avinu, it doesn't say that the name lasted till this very day. It says Avram gave it the name Be'er Sheva, that's it. By Yitzchak Avinu, it says, as a result of his naming his well Shiva, therefore, the name of the city is Be'er Sheva till this very day. Only his name endures, according to Torah, for eternity. Why? The Radak, Rabbeinu David Kimchi, who lived far earlier than the Sipparn. Radak was born approximately in 1160 and passed away in 1235, lived in the province in southern France, Rabbeinu David Kimchi. And he tells us the following explanation. Open up your curriculum and source sheet to source number 4. Zog the Radak. Umasha Amar al Kain Shemeir Be'er Sheva v'chein nikras b'mei Avram k'may shekasov. Why are you telling me that the city's name is Be'er Sheva when it already was called this way in the times of Avram? Al zeh ha'maisa ya yoser kavua v'nisker Shemeir ba'avur mar shahayakan she'iru shnei dvarim ka'ela la'aval ben. The Radak says, you're right, but I just want to explain to you, he says, it was only because of the story which occurred with Yitzchak which really gave the name absolute validity. The name actually stuck. Because when it happened, not only to the father, but it was repeated with the child, suddenly the name stuck. When Avram Avinu gave the name Be'er Sheva, it didn't stick, it was a story. But when the same story occurs once again with the son, not just with the father, with the son, like pop-up, like son, like father, like son, now the name sticks. This itself needs explanation. Why is it that Avram Avinu's name Be'er Sheva does not endure? But when it happens to Yitzchak, a second time, suddenly now people decide, this is a good reason to name Be'er Sheva, Be'er Sheva, to this very day. I saw an interpretation, one person says Avram Avinu only named the well Be'er Sheva, that territory. It says Al Kain Karel HaMakom Ahu, that place around the well he called Be'er Sheva. Yitzchak Avinu had the whole city called Be'er Sheva. Shema'ir, the Torah says by Yitzchak, the whole city, Shema'ir Be'er Sheva. So he expanded the territory of the name, but that itself begs the question, why? Why did Avram limit the name to that territory of the well, and Yitzchak expanded the name to the entire city? We must discover the essence of the story that's being conveyed here. Namely, that the tremendous distinction between Avram's name and Yitzchak's name is reflected in the difference why they gave the name. Avram Avinu named it because of an oath, and Yitzchak Avinu named it also because of a well. You see, Avram's name, Be'er Sheva, immortalizes the treaty between him and Avimelech. The oath they took to each other, the agreement they made that they will be loyal to each other, honest, law-abiding citizens who will not seize each other's property. But this very oath that Avimelech accepted upon himself has been breached. One generation later, in the times of Yitzchak, Avimelech's servants stopped Avram's wells, plugged them, filled them with earth, and then quarreled with Yitzchak over new wells. So this great oath, this great peace treaty, this great conference that they had in which they declared peace between each other, one generation later, was not valid any longer. Yitzchak Avinu's Be'er Sheva was not commemorating the oath he took with Avimelech. It was commemorating the fact that he dug a seventh well. Here the Torah says, Al Kain Shema'ir Be'er Sheva ad hayom hazeh. Because of this, The name Be'er Sheva exists for this city till this very day. Political agreements, as charming as they are, don't always endure. They don't have eternal value. Why is this city called Be'er Sheva for generations to come, Ad Hayom Hazeh, to this very day? It's because of the work of Yitzchak to dig well springs of water despite the obstacles and notwithstanding the stumbling blocks and the opposition and the antagonism and the failures, and yet continue to dig and prevail, triumph. Al Kain Shemeir Be'er Sheva Ad Hayom Hazeh. This is why it carries the name of Be'er Sheva to this very day. What does this mean? How do we understand this? To understand this, we must preface a much greater question. The only real thing we know about our father Yitzchak is that he dug wells. Avraham Avinu, the Torah tells us many stories about. His hospitality, his conversations with God, his travels through the land, his rescuing his nephew in a very courageous war, and other stories. Yitzchak, there's one primary story about him directly. What? He dug wells. One well and another well and another well and another well and another well. His whole biography revolves with digging wells. Already in Parshas Chayesara, where did he meet his bride? He was coming back from a well called Lachayroi. He used to frequently visit that well. Later in Chayesara, after his father's death, he lives near that well, Lachayroi. That's in Chayesara. In Toldos, we have him digging 7 wells. Battling for those wells. What's the symbolism here? What's the significance of this? What is the meaning behind this? Why is the Torah telling this to us? But here we come to understand one of the fundamental differences between the first Jew and the second Jew, between Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu, the 2 first pillars of Judaism. You see, Avraham Avinu is the revolutionary who creates ethical monotheism. Avraham Avinu is the creator, the progenitor, the father who sparks off the revolution in the world. According to Rabbeinu Menachem HaMeiri, Avraham Avinu converted half of civilization to ethical monotheism, to the ideas of Judaism. He created a system and he publicized it in the whole world. Maimonides Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah in chapter 1 describes how Avraham Avinu would go from city to city and assemble the masses and pontificate to them, preach to them, explain to them, lecture to them. He ignited a revolution. And the world acknowledged him. Nasi Elokim ata b'sochenu, you're a prince of God. The Hittite tribe tells him in the beginning of Chayesara before the funeral of his wife Sarah. But without Yitzchak Avinu, Judaism would have no future. You see, when you read the Torah, you read the Bible, Avraham Avinu is the legendary hero. Avraham Avinu is the international celebrity. Avraham Avinu is renowned, exceptional. Yitzchak Avinu is extremely passive, silent. We find him doing one thing, digging wells. The binding of Isaac is a story about Avraham Avinu primarily. His own marriage, we don't see him play a major role there. The blessings he gives to Esav, wants to give to Esav, something else happens. The only story where we find him actively engaged is digging wells. Don't underestimate Yitzchak Avinu. Without Yitzchak, there would be no future to Judaism, because there were many movements in the world that began with a blitz, with a spark, with a lightning, with a lot of oomph and vigor and power and inspiration. But there was no consistency. They did not create the ability for maintenance. How does the Pasuk say in Tehillim? David HaMelech says, Miyala Bahar Hashem umiyakum b'mkayim kachri. Who will ascend the mountain of God and who will remain standing in his holy place? Lots of people can climb the mountain. There's drama, there's excitement, there's popularity, there's interest, there's curiosity. You climbed the mountain. You made it to the top. Umiyakum b'mkayim kachri. But who will remain standing? When the lights fade, when there's no press conference, there's no commercials, nobody knows. If I can give a very profane, simple example, everybody goes on a diet, but who stays on the diet? It's easy to go on the diet. You're excited the first week, I'm going to lose 25 pounds, sure, no problem. But what about 3 months later, 3 years later, at a bar mitzvah, at a reception, at a chassan, at a Shabbos table, a night dinner, a breakfast, a lunch? Maintenance, consistency. That's a greater challenge, and sometimes far greater than the challenge of breaking through boundaries, because here there's no excitement, there's no fanfare. And the same is true in collective movements, organizations, civilizations, cultures. Avraham Avinu generated the spark, the light, the oomph, the power, the projection. Yitzchak Avinu constructed the internal infrastructure for Judaism. He digs the well springs of Judaism. He knows you can't rely only on the rain, which comes from above, and you can't rely only on the water that comes from outside, on the attention, on the response, the feedback, the charisma you manage to create, and the conversations among the masses. You must discover the secret of internalization. Yitzchak Avinu is the one who digs underground silently the inner wells of Judaism. Maybe we can give another example of something closer to our times. The first 2 generations of Hasidus. The Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and his student and successor, the Mezritcher Maggid. What was the difference? 2 very different people. The Baal Shem Tov traveled constantly. He traveled from city to city, from town to town. He spoke, he inspired, he preached, he elevated. He projected a beautiful, holy, sacred energy and evoked within the Jewish people the deepest recesses of their own soul through his conversations with them, through his teachings, and through his students. Then he passed away. The Mezritcher Maggid was not the Baal Shem Tov. In fact, he didn't travel. He remained in one place. But what the Mezritcher Maggid did for Hasidus is what Yitzchak Avinu did for Judaism. They built the internal infrastructure, not the light, but the vessels to contain the light. Not the energy, but the containers to harness, channel, and structure the energy. You can have the greatest ideas, dreams, ambitions. You'll take over the world. But if you don't have the vessels and the infrastructure, on a pragmatic level and also on an ideological level, a system which is never as exciting as a revolution, it will not endure. You will not be able to transfer it in an intergenerational link. Judaism has these 2 components. Judaism has a message, l'sakin olam b'malchus shendalad yud tikun olam, to heal the world, to saturate the world with godliness, with goodness, with holiness, to machen de Welt a teure Welt, to take the world and transform it into a Torah world, a world that reflects the vision of Torah, the blueprint of the universe. But Judaism has something else. The internal work, the internal labor, psychological, mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical within each and every person. There's the element of the mission of Judaism to the Jewish people and ultimately to the world. And then there is the internal work of Judaism, each person individually within their own soul and in the depth of their heart. And this is represented by digging wells. It wasn't only a physical excavation of dirt to find well springs, as every episode in the Torah it represented a spiritual and emotional form of labor. Yitzchak Avinu goes deeper and deeper into himself, representing the ideal of digging through all of the layers, the thick, dense layers of gravel and dirt and earth, to discover the inner purity, the idealism, the well springs of wisdom, of information, of knowledge, of inspiration, of enlightenment, and never stopping to dig, never putting down the shovel and becoming smug and complacent and forgetting that for the truth of Judaism to survive, you can't just have a message to the whole world. And you can't just project to the whole world, but you must go deeper and deeper into yourself and challenge yourself to your core. And it goes one step deeper. Even the wells that Avraham Avinu once dug, because he also dug wells. Avraham Avinu was no simple projector. Avraham Avinu was the man of God who created Judaism. Even those wells were plugged after his passing, and Yitzchak redug them. And what that means is sometimes we see that people rely on the inspiration of their parents, of their grandparents. How many Jews live a Jewish life and it's beautiful, but without any internal real experience, but they know this is what their father and mother did, this is what their grandfather and grandmother did, their great-grandparents, all the way back to Yitzchak and Avraham Avinu in one way or another way. Comes Yitzchak Avinu and says, there's a problem. My experience is not your experience. And I forever cannot glean inspiration from somebody else's experience. It's true your father and your Zayd and your great-grandfather and your great-grandmother dug wells and they found water. But after their passing, those wells can easily be plugged and stopped, and you have to go and re-dig the wells. You have to put in the work and find your own experience of Hashem, of godliness, of truth. You have to find your own relationship with God, with Torah. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't take anything for granted. He doesn't say, I had a father and I'm going to live off the attention, the spotlights that were always on Avraham Avinu, and I'm his son, I'm his successor. No. Yitzchak Avinu understood with that Judaism will not survive just with the fact that your grandfather was a great man. And he used to go to a great man, and there are stories, and there are documentaries, and there are books, and there are films. It's not going to cut it. You're not going to have anything substantial to give over. You need to give over an experience, a real experience, and you have to let your children experience it. And if you're not experiencing anything, what are they going to experience? So Yitzchak Avinu has to take the hoe in his hands and re-dig the wells on his own. But he doesn't change the names. Sometimes you re-dig the wells and you think you have to change names, you have to be original. He doesn't change the names. He calls the wells the same names like his father Avraham Avinu. But he dug them. Now we'll understand the story with the names of Be'er Shava, Be'er Sheva. Avraham Avinu gave the name Be'er Shava. Why? Because this was the place where there was a tremendous peace agreement between him and Avimelech. This was news that was fit to print. It was reported on the blogs, on the websites, on the networks, on radio and on television. It was talk of the town. There were pictures, there were photographs, there were movies, there were videos. Avraham Avinu's handshake with Avimelech, the king of Philistine, on the lawn of the White House in Gerar. Finally, after years of discord and suspicion and accusations, peace has arrived in our times between Avraham Avinu and Avimelech. Comes the Torah and tells us Avraham Avinu celebrated it, he commemorated it, he gave the name Be'er Shava. But that did not endure because politics comes and goes. Politics can change by the day, can change by the hour. Diplomacy and politics are powerful, but they're also extremely transient. They don't endure. That's the nature of political agreements, political alliances, political relationships. Sometimes Jews, for example, dedicate an enormous amount of time, resources, and energy for diplomacy, for political alliances, for political connections. And it's important, and it's vital, and it's part of our obligation. Avraham Avinu wants there to be a peace treaty between him and Avimelech, the king of Plishtim, the king of Philistine, but never forget that it's politics. And the essence of Judaism cannot rely only on foreign, successful, charming, and engaging relationships and the fact that there's a good report in the press. Judaism must have an internal structure. You must vibrate, you must have an inner vitality and a pulsating vibrancy in life within the core. You cannot generate inspiration and vitality to a new generation of youngsters just because you have a photograph in your office of you giving a handshake to the king of Avimelech, the king of Philistine. Yitzchak Avinu represents this other dimension. Yitzchak Avinu doesn't call it Be'er Sheva because Avimelech came and shook his hand and took a picture and made a peace treaty and they had a conference and they drank together and they played golf together and they had dinner together. To be sure, Yitzchak was no small diplomat. He also knew how to greet Avimelech. The Torah says he threw a lavish meal. They ate, they drank, they celebrated. Yitzchak Avinu wasn't isolated in a cocoon. He knew how to speak to Avimelech. He treated him nicely. There was a royal dinner, a royal breakfast, a royal lunch. It was beautiful. It was great. It was gewaldig. But Yitzchak Avinu never forgot what really makes him tick. He never failed to remember what is the essence of Jewish life. And he never failed to remember what will constitute and what constitute the true values, ideals, traditions which Judaism represents. Engaging with Avimelech, yes. Celebrating, yes. But the name Be'er Sheva is because he's digging wells. And now he reached the seventh well. Be'er is the acronym B'yotcha Afkid Ruchi. That verse, B'yotcha, in your hands, God, Afkid Ruchi, I deposit my spirit. That internal relationship with transcendence, with Hashem, with God, with the essence of reality. That eternal relationship with morality, with integrity, and with the values that Yiddishkeit and Torah and mitzvahs represent and capture in a Jew's daily life. Be'er Sheva. That was Yitzchak Avinu's name. Avraham Avinu's mission was to affect the world, and he did. But the Torah comes and says, Al Kain Shema Ir Be'er Sheva Ad Hayom Hazeh. Avram's Be'er Sheva was powerful for that time. When Yitzchak names it Be'er Sheva, he names it not Be'er Sheva, but Be'er Sheva. Not for the oath, but for the number of wells which he is digging, representing the conversation of Judaism within itself, representing the inner life of Torah that the Jew lives with, representing the inner work that the Jew engages with himself or herself, with his loved ones, his community, his friends, and then it reaches like a ripple effect the whole world. B'yotcha afkid ruchi. My spirit, be'er, I give to you. I surrender to you. I align with you. I connect to you. So he calls the Be'er Shiva well. And the Torah says, he calls the Be'er Shiva number 7. The Torah says, Al Kain, therefore, Shema Ir Be'er Sheva Ad Hayom Hazeh. Therefore, automatically, the name of the city became Be'er Sheva, and the name endures to this very day. And this is true in each and every one of us, because each and every one of us has 2 dimensions in our life. We have our work outside of ourselves. Let's call it the PR component within us. There is a need for public relations. Every person individually, you need your own public relations, your social network, the people you connect to, the people you influence, the people you are influenced from. And then the Jewish people collectively, we have the need for public relations within the Jewish world and outside of the Jewish world to the world at large. And then there is the inner work of the Jewish people, collectively in Klal Yisrael itself and individually. Every Jew within his or her, every soul, every day, to dig your own wells and find your own wellspring of water, to challenge yourself deeper and deeper. Comes the Torah and says, Be'er Sheva is great and awesome and necessary and vital and important. But don't forget, Yitzchak Avinu's Be'er Sheva will allow it to remain Ad Hayom Hazeh, will give it the power of eternity, and will make sure that it endures through generations and never dries up. Avram's wells were stopped. They were plugged by the Philistines. Yitzchak Avinu's wells were not plugged. They were not stopped. Because he created an internal reservoir of water of inspiration. I want to conclude with a story. The story takes us back to the years before the Second World War. One of the impressive accomplishments in Poland in the late 1920s was the creation of the famous Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin was one of the largest yeshivas before the Second World War, located in the impressive structure in the great Polish Jewish city of Lublin, Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. The ground stone for that yeshiva was laid Lag BaOmer Tafresh Pei Daled Lag BaOmer 1924, and it opened its doors. It opened its doors on Chav Ches Sivan Tafresh Tzadik, the 28th of Sivan, 1930. June 1930, and that's when there was the Chanukah Sabayis, the dedication of the new yeshiva, which housed hundreds of students, and then was destroyed by the Germans, by the Nazis, Yimach Shema. A few years ago, that building remained intact, although used for other reasons, and they renovated it. They made a Chanukah Sabayis a few years ago. For the groundbreaking of the yeshiva and then for the dedication of the yeshiva, many, many Jews came from all over Poland, including many famous rabbis, scholars, and sages. And during the ceremony, of course, everyone extolled the virtue of the founder, the dean, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, the legendary Rabbi Meir Shapiro. Rabbi Meir Shapiro is also the founder of Daf Yomi, of the curriculum of learning a Blat Gemara every day, was the rabbi first of Pietrikov and then became the rabbi of Lublin. Actually, one day after the yeshiva opened its doors, he became the rabbi of the city as well, Chav Tesiv and Tafresh Tzadik. And Rabbi Meir Shapiro was the one who carried this yeshiva on his shoulders. He fundraised for it. He traveled to the U.S. to fundraise for it. He built it. He built a beautiful study and library in the yeshiva, where he would sit and learn, and where the students would sit and learn. Rabbi Shapiro was an extraordinary orator and a leader, a very charismatic person, and a great scholar and genius. Sadly, he did not enjoy much nachas from the yeshiva because he passed away at a very young age, a few years later, in 1933. He was very young. He was in his 40s. He died without children. And Rabbi Meir Shapiro then was obviously the topic of discussion, where most of the speakers brought out the greatness of what he has done, of what he has accomplished, what he has achieved with this yeshiva, especially that it was one of the first yeshivas that gave the students everything they needed. They didn't have to go eat in other people's homes, tag, which was the custom at the time. They can eat and dorm and relax and study all in one place. So it elevated the dignity of Torah study to new heights. One of the speakers at this monumental event was the Chartkever Rebbe. Chartkever Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Friedman, an Einikel from the Heilige, grandson from the Heilige Ruzhiner, Rabbi Yisrael Ruzhiner, was a mentor, was a Rebbe of Rabbi Meir Shapiro. And when he stood up to speak, he said, Meirel, Meirel, he said, everyone has been extolling your virtues, how great you are, and the great deed you have done with the building of this yeshiva. I want to ask another question, Reb Meir. For was hast du bekommen the schus auf a mitzvah? Why did you merit this great historic moment in Polish Jewish history? I don't want to discuss how great you are. I want to discuss why you were lucky, why this privilege was conferred upon you, why destiny and providence gave you the opportunity to do this. That's my question. And I know the answer. The answer is because of something you have done privately in your life. Something that took place in the intimacy of your own life between you, your soul, and your God. And it is because of that which you have done that Hashem rewarded you with the schus, with the privilege and the opportunity to do this, to build Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. This is not your great achievement. This is your merit. This is your reward for another achievement. But that achievement nobody knows about. That achievement was private. It was between you and yourself, within your own soul, behind closed doors. Only your God knows about it. And the Chartgever concluded, he said, it's not this which I envy. This is your reward. It's that private, internal deed, or lifestyle, or commitment, or victory, or trial that you passed in the privacy and intimacy of your own life, which I don't know what that is. It's that which I am envious of. Have a wonderful night.